If you are a guest with us this morning, or you're getting back in town, or you figured you wanted to say some prayers at church before mini season, we're glad that you're here. The way that we're spending this summer is to pick passages and people from the Old Testament, stories that we've probably maybe heard in Sunday school, people that would be a familiar name, but to dig a little bit more down into their situation, the lesson that we would find in that. 2 weeks ago we did Abraham and Isaac. Last week you heard me tell you that the story of Jonah was not so much about Jonah and a whale. It was probably Jonah and a Goliath grouper, but even more than a story about Jonah and a Jewfish, it was a story of racism and disobedience to God, and that when we're able to turn and face what is clearly, we know, something that is a flaw in us, that God is absolutely able to welcome us back, to restore us, to do a new thing. You heard some of my story last week, and you're going to hear a story this week about a man known, his descriptor was that he was a man after God's own heart. And you would think that if somebody gives you an intro, if we've got someone to come in and speak, and you would think that if we would say, oh, this next speaker is a man after God's own heart, you would think, boy, that guy has surely got his act together. This guy really must walk on water almost. And when we read the story of David, it's a mess. I mean, you could take like an entire season of the Jerry Springer Show and just kind of boil it down into one person's life, and you get the story of King David. Kids that were a mess, murder, adultery. You could make a strong case for bipolar. David was all over the place, and I think that's a man after God's own heart. What made David a man after God's own heart is that even though his life was flawed, that he was flawed, that his circumstances were not always the fruit that one would expect for a man after God's own heart, that he continually tried, that he was always seeking, that he was always wanting, desiring holiness in his own life. And when he fell off the proverbial horse, he would get back on. I'm going to throw a bunch of scriptures at you today, towards you, and I would invite you to take notes if that's something that you do not normally do, to grab a pen or a pencil, or if you want to make a note on your smartphone or tablet, whatever works for you. And many of them are in the Psalms. King David is credited with writing a lot of the Psalms, most of the Psalms. And one of the great benefits, you remember last summer we worked through the Psalms in church. One of the great benefits of reading the Psalms is they present to us, if we read them and we think, well, David has written many of these, you get to see a lot of the seasons of life that the godly go through as life changes and turns up and turns down. And in doing so, when we look at the different seasons of life with the saints of old, we find guidance for us, pattern of godliness for us to follow for our lives today and tomorrow. And one of the patterns of life that comes up over and over again in the Psalms is being in the pit, being down in the dumps, being down and not seeing a way out, being down and not seeing a way up, not seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. So David has written Psalm 40. It's a longer psalm than we're going to read. We're just going to read the first 3 verses, and I'll read 2 different translations to give you a little bit of balance as to what's going on. But I'd invite you to think in terms of this. One day my life will pass away. There will be no more. One day the same will happen for you. But the words which we are about to read are forever. Listen now to the word of God. I waited patiently for the Lord to help me. And he turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the pit of despair, out of the mud and the mire. He set my feet on solid ground and steadied me as I walked along. He has given me a new song to sing, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see what he has done and be amazed. They will put their trust in the Lord. Do we have, Trish, do we have the next one?
I only have one. What version is it?
Nope, we're going to move on. It was the New American Standard, but you get it, right? It's a pattern of life in just 3 verses, which every one of us knows about firsthand. And in just 3 verses, David goes through, there's a whole lot going on. And so we're going to hit very quickly 6 stages, parts of his experience. It's just about the pit. There's only one point. You know I'm not a good enough preacher that I can preach more than one point, and it's just about being in the pit with God. But it's got 6 subpoints. So first, you see David is in the muddy pit. Second, he cries out for help to God. And then he waits. Thirdly, he waits for the Lord. Fourth, you would hope God would come to the rescue sooner than fourth, right? But fourth, God draws him out of the pit of Satan. Fifth, God gives David a new psalm. Remember that the psalms that we're reading, there are 150 in the Bible, they're poetry. They were intended to be put to music. So it's not a big jump for us to think that when David, in the 5th stage, says, "You have given me a new song," there's a really good chance we're reading the new song. That he's written a new lyric, he's written a new melody, and this is it. And then the 6th stage is that others, many others, it says, will come to know God and trust God when they see this pattern of life. And so even to think that David being in the pit is a way that not only would God be glorified, but that God would spread his light and his love. And for too long, I think the Christians that are especially vulnerable to this, but we have chewed and swallowed this idea that as a Christian, you're always supposed to be happy. You're always supposed to be joyful. Life is always going to be great. And so what that creates is, can we call it hypocrisy? Can we call it inauthentic? Can we call it not being real? When underneath there's a storm going on, and life is upside down, but on the outside, we would say, you know, I told you the most dangerous question you can ask me on Sunday, how are you doing? Because I have to think, do I want to lie to this person? I don't think I do. So if this morning I gave you the, I'm all right, that's all you're getting before church. You know, and it's a tough question because we just kind of, you know, throw, hey, I'm doing good, how are you doing? And then you feel like, oh, well, if you're doing good, I must be doing, you know, and there's the competition, you know. And God's desire, my desire, our desire ought to be just that we could be a little more real, a little more genuine, a little more honest, and less deceiving and deceitful with people. So here we've got the king, King David. He's in the pits. He he's not literally in a pit, but he's trying to paint a picture to give us a photograph. But so that when we look up it, in different translations of the Bible, in the pit, it's the pit of destruction. And the New American Standard. In the King James, it is the horrible pit. In the Revised Standard, it is the desolate pit. The pit of destruction, what we read this morning. What it refers to when it appears in other places in the Bible is a roaring storm. When you consider that normally the meaning of a pit is a deep hole, a cistern, but then to think that you are trapped, stuck in this deep hole while there's a hurricane going on at the bottom of the hole. That gives the image that David's trying to say, here's where I am. Here's where I am. I'm stuck, alone, down in a hole, and there's a hurricane going on. It's dark. It's underground. So perhaps what we are to imagine is David falling to a low, sinking deep into some sludge at the bottom. Every time he tries to get his footing, he feels like he's sinking a little bit more and more, and obviously quickly there comes a sense of helplessness, quicksand, desperation. And then as he sinks deeper and deeper and it's coming up the neck, there's desperation that if I could just get a breath, if I just had a breath of air, it would be worth $1 million, worth more than all the cars and the trucks and the boats and the trailers that have been coming down here all weekend. Helplessness, desperation, hopelessness, the breaking point for the overworked businessman, the outer limits of exasperation for the mother, the impossible expectation of too many classes in school for the student, the grinding stress of a lingering illness that won't go away, the imminent attack of a powerful enemy. We don't know. We don't know what exactly David was experiencing. But it's okay for us to put ourselves in his shoes. In verse 1, I waited patiently for the Lord to help me, and he turned to me and heard my cry. If you don't know this about David, he cried a lot. Psalm 6, verse 6, he says, I am worn out from sobbing. All night I flooded my bed with weeping, drenching it with my tears. You'll remember maybe in the New Testament, blessed are those who mourn. It's a good thing when a woman or a man genuinely cries out to God. Not so much like the athlete who gets a cramp while swimming, or the weekend warrior who puts on a snorkel and a mask for the first time in a year and then tries to go out there and catch some bugs and goes, my hamstring is cramped up. And there's pain and there's tears. But it's more like this. It's more like the little child who's wandered too far out in the surf, starts to get pulled by the undertow and the waves, and cries out, Mommy, Daddy. It's a childlike cry. And the cry is a cry to God. It's not a cry to a buddy. It's not a cry to a spouse. It's not a cry to a friend. Some of us are willing to say, I'm in the pit and I need some help. But we would go anywhere for help, except for the Lord. Psalm 118, beginning in verse 8, says, it is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in people. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust princes. Or we could probably translate that governments. You won't argue with me if I say it's better to trust in the Lord than it is to trust in governments, right? says this, don't put your confidence in powerful people. There's no help for you there. When they breathe their last, they return to the earth, and all their plans die with them. Be joyful, but joyful are those who have the God of Israel as their helper. Joyful are those whose hope is the Lord. So therefore, the lesson that we learned is when we're in the pit, don't cry out to your neighbor, cry out to God. Step one. Stage one. Stage two is the waiting. I waited patiently for the Lord. I waited intently for the Lord. Waiting for the Lord is a great part of the Christian life. It is not an easy part of the Christian life. Because there are at least two essential ingredients needed for waiting. Humility and hope. I had to go to the doctor this week. Let's do this. I was out free diving and I ruptured an eardrum. So I do not want to hear about how excited you are to go diving on mini season this week, because I'm in dry dock. What did somebody say to me? You can still come. You can drive the boat. Thanks. Thanks. Ow! So I had to go, and it's fine. It's okay. I'm coming to terms with it more and more. This is why I'm preaching on depression, because here's my hand. It's funny, and I don't mean to make light of being depressed, but here's the point I'm trying to make, because I had to go to the doctor this week. And it was one of those, we can squeeze you in at 3 o'clock. And I said, okay, I'll take it. And I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but the doctor was behind schedule. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but the doctor was running late. And so, I had to sit. I had to wait. It was not what I would call a short wait. I was there for some time. Have you ever been church? Let's have church. Have you ever been church? In a large waiting room at the doctor's office. When the doctor is late, the patients are just stacking up. People just keep coming in and signing. And you're like, what? Did you guys get a group rate? What is this? And then, I don't know if you ever look around. I didn't have any toys. Normally when I go to the doctor's office, and I got the kids with me, I bring toys. So we're all playing with Matchbox cars, I didn't have the kids, so it was just me. I had no toys, so I just had to sit. And I didn't want to watch cops on TV. And so I just watched. And there were clearly two groups of people. There were the ones that get feisty with the receptionist. Start grumbling to people around them. I wonder what the wait is. I wonder what's taking so long. I've been here since Tuesday. And there's this feeling of entitlement. I had an appointment for 1 o'clock. I should be seen at 1 o'clock. This presumptuous that I have rights. Sometimes that happens when we wait for the Lord, right? What about my rights? It's 1 o'clock. I've been waiting for like 2 minutes. God. And when we do this, when there's this entitlement, this presumptuous, sense of, God, you need to move, and you need to move right now, very clearly, we show how badly we need God to delay in making us wait. Like a spoiled child, like a grumpy person in the doctor's office. Humility. Second, hope. Psalm 130, verse 5 says, I wait for the Lord. My whole being waits. And in His word, I put my hope. Waiting is so very different from lazy. Waiting is not passive. It's more like a hungry animal. Looking, expecting, longing for food. I mean, the psalm says, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs for thee. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. That's Psalm 42. So when is God going to deliver you from the pit? At the right time. And that's all I've got. That's all we can know. And it needs to be enough. The Lord does deliver David. In verse 2 of Psalm 40, it says, He lifted me out of the pit of despair, out of the mud and the mire. He set my feet on solid ground, steadied me as I walked along. There is a world of difference between quicksand and rocks, right? God moves us when He comes from a sense of desperation to a sense of security. In the pit, we do not forget God, but our sense of His presence, God's comfort, was not as lively, was not as full as when God rescues us. What if the essence of the rescue is restoring the strong feeling of God's closeness, ever-present help? And then the Lord gives David a new song to sing. When we read the Bible, there's this message. God can deliver from every sort of pit and destruction. God will deliver His servants from anything that would harm or destroy their faith. And when He does, we will sing. Verse 3 of Psalm 40, He has given me a new song to sing, a hymn of praise to our God. And I know that at least one of you is going to say, well, I couldn't carry the tune, Where's your basket? Okay, I was waiting for bucket, but someone said bushel basket. That was great alliteration. I wish I had thought about that. He has given me a new song to sing. People who never sing, at least in their heart, I worry, are people who do not cherish anything very deeply or feel intense gratitude for anything. And this is not me going, I'm a wannabe musician, telling you that you should all be wannabe musicians. I just know that there are songs that maybe are not sung, but there's something going on in your heart from time to time. There's some song, there's some sound that gets your attention, that makes your toe tap. You know, we've been coming to church together long enough that I know that we'll do certain songs, and I'll get some of you to sway. You may not sing, but you've got a new song in your heart. If you're swaying, or maybe you're rocking. All of us gravitate from time to time to a very fallen and broken nature. And one of the ways that God keeps us awake is by letting us walk ourselves into the pits, leaving us there a while, bringing us back out into fresh air. Do you know any other way to get someone to love air besides letting them almost be suffocated and then letting them breathe again? A few years ago, I think it's been 3, during our beloved lobster season, there was, down in the hole, there was this lobster. And the hole had two ways to get in. And son of a gun, he didn't know right where the middle point was. And so I tried to go in this way, and I could feel him when I'm grabbing him, and he's kind of, doing the thing with the antenna. It's like, you can't catch me. And I said, hold on, let me try this. And I'm holding my breath. I'm a snorkeler. And I'm down with the other hand, and he is on the other side, and I said, I got this. So I come back up, I take a breath, I go back down, and I stick my hand down in there, and then I'm going like this, and it's up to my shoulder, and I get him. And then like a monkey holding onto a piece of fruit, I realize I'm stuck. I'm a snorkeler. So I'm holding my breath, and the first thing I think is, don't panic. And then I think, oh, jeez! And so I go, you know what? I've got a 7-foot wingspan. Let's make use of this thing. So I stick the other hand around, and I grab them. And that's when I realized that I was wearing a really big wristwatch. Because I was stuck. I got the lobster out, just so you, and I survived, just so you know the end of the story. It's like you're going into Titanic, and you're like, what's going to happen? Here I am. But there was this moment of thinking, when they find me, Caitlin is going to kill me. I was stuck. I was stuck by my watch, and I'm twisting, and I'm grinding. And I don't know how long it was. I'd love to tell you it was 12 minutes. I just know that when I flopped like a fish onto the deck of the boat, when God loosed my wristwatch, there was a new song in my mouth. There was a song of praise, a song of thanksgiving to breathing. Precious air, sweet air, priceless air. And there was a new song of praise to God. You rescued me from the pit. I also got a new dive buddy after that day. I was like, you didn't notice I was down there for 4 minutes? And he's like, I thought you were just really good. I've never wanted to breathe so much in my entire life. Something that we take for granted. That is the kind of love that God desires from us for Him. That we would gasp, crave the presence of God. And that when we taste it, when we breathe it, that there would be a new song in our heart, that there would be that stirring in our mind and a stirring in our heart. We've got, you want to talk about music, and we can. We've got different folks and different music. And in the summer, we try to blend some of the music. In order to make everyone miserable, we give everyone all the kinds of music. But we do sing the songs of old here at this church, because those words, many of those words are inspired. They're rich. They encourage us to carry on our faith. We've got strong memories of singing Amazing Grace, or Great is Thy Faithfulness, how great Thou art. And so we hold yesterday close enough to be reminded of God's faithfulness in the past, yet we also look forward to God's blessing today and to tomorrow. Our hope is that God would put a new song in our hearts, that we wouldn't always be stuck in yesterday. And we're not talking about songs so much. We ought to sing the songs of yesterday's saints. And there ought to be new songs. And they ought to come from you, because God has put them in your heart and in your mouth. The last stage of David being in the pit is that others see this meltdown happen. They see David wait patiently. They see David's faith. They see David get rescued. They see David get lifted. And they say, I want to know that God. That's what I want in my life. When I'm in the pit, I want the one who rescues. Who knows? For those of you who are going through the pit, who knows how many might be inspired and led to have a saving faith in God simply by watching you struggle. Isn't it something about? That when God delivers us from the pit, and He puts the new song in our heart, His goal is not just your benefit. His goal is to benefit and love all those around you. It's never just about you with God. It's just not about you. John 3:16, for God so loved the world. Right? Not just you. For God so loved the world. And when we put on this mask, everything's great. We rob the world of seeing firsthand the God who rescues. And we show them a counterfeit God of sunshine and bunny rabbits. But if we could be a little more genuine, they see a person who, contrary to human nature, was in humble distress, who never lost hope totally, maybe who wavered, maybe who floundered, banked on God. And when we were delivered, that we gave God the glory. When I was in the pit and I couldn't get out, but God saved me. And then the world sees something real. And the world sees something that is genuine. All the buzzwords, all the trendy buzzwords, authentic. Let's put authentic. They see something that is authentic. They see something that rings true in the human heart. And only then can someone outside the church begin to think, boy, my unbelief, my lack of faith is completely inadequate. If I were to go through what that person went through, what would I do? I'd go on a bender, go on a shopping spree. But when someone can watch us struggle, and we're humble enough and hopeful enough to remind ourselves, there is one who lives in me, whose power is so great. The power, the same power